Good morning. It's so good to see so many faces. I see some familiar faces just from last week. It's good to have Stephanie with us as well today. And we look forward to this conversation on monitoring and getting our skills all ironed up and ready to go. So we're going to have more of an interactive time this coffee chat where you'll be able to ask questions throughout the presentation today. So if you would pray with me at this time. Loving God, as we work toward a world that sees each of us as beloved children, made in the image of our Creator, help us to unlearn perceptions, expectations, explicit and implicit biases, all those things that crowd our minds and prevent us from seeing one another as worthy, loved children of God's wide kingdom. May we be the ones who embody your love and grace so that people can hear you, see you, and know that you are indeed with us. For the scripture tells us there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for we are all one in Christ Jesus. Amen. We have our coffee chats on Thursday, and we like to remember and bring awareness to the importance of Thursdays in Black. And I do see many of you are in Black today. In every country, gender-based violence is a tragic reality. This violence is frequently hidden, and victims are often silent, fearing stigma and further violence. We all have a responsibility to speak out against violence, to ensure that women and men, boys and girls are safe from rape and violence in homes, schools, work, streets, and all the places throughout our society. The World Council of Churches established Thursdays in Black campaign in the late 1980s as a peaceful protest to challenge attitudes that cause rape and violence. This campaign was inspired by the mothers of the disappeared in Buenos Aires, who on Thursdays protested at the Plaza de Mayo against the disappearance of their children during the violent dictatorship. The women in Black in Israel and Palestine, who up to now protest against war and violence. Women in Rwanda and Bosnia, who were protesting against the use of rape as a weapon of war during the genocide. Black Sash movement in South Africa protesting against apartheid and its use of violence against Black people. All of these stories raised awareness on rape as a weapon of war, gender, injustice, abuse, violence, and many tragedies that grow outward from such violence. These things became all the more visible. But what also became visible was women's resilience, agency, and personal efforts to resist such violations. So friends, we all can participate in being not just resilient, but being agents of change. So as we prepare to go to our annual conferences, perhaps you will call all people to wear Black on Thursdays in remembrance of the importance of eradicating sexism, violence against women in particular and girls, and making a difference in not just our churches, but throughout the world. Amen. Well, we're glad today that we have our communicator, Roya James, with us, who will help us through this process. We have prepared a presentation for you. It will be available after this presentation, after this Zoom time together. And we are also preparing supplement resources to make available to you and your annual conferences. It's funny how time flies, but it's almost time again for us to embark on our annual conference sessions. And the fact that you have shown up today means that you want to monitor your sessions this year. So we are glad that you've joined us. Just want to remind you of our purpose of GCSRW. That's the acronym that we use, and we talk about the use of acronyms in part of our lesson today. But the purpose of the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women is to challenge the United Methodist Church to a continuing commitment to the full and equal responsibility and participation of women in the total life and mission of the church, sharing fully in the power and in the policy making at all levels of the church's life. And of course, this can be found in our Book of Discipline, paragraph 2102. We are mandated to monitor annual conferences, jurisdictional conferences, and general conferences. Monitoring for inclusiveness. And then, of course, we must report these findings back to the church. The whole purpose of us fulfilling this mandate is to bring excluded individuals and or groups of persons into all areas of decision making so that we share some power. We want everyone in a given annual conference to feel like their voice is valued. So I like the point that says it empowers everyone. And that is what we are working toward, right? Monitors, you can move to the next slide, but let me just share with you some qualities that we need to possess when we go into these spaces. We need to be recognizable, but not obvious, right? Always available. Make sure that you are seated within the bar and that you're constantly alert. Be attentive to the details. I'm sure we all have stories that we could share where people came to us with some concerns, and maybe we could have responded in a different way. So remember that when you're there as COSROW, you are actually also representing us, the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. And when you, at this time, many of you have my cell number and other members, and when you have a question, you could quickly send a text just to get a quick response. But be mindful and be open and helpful and positive and supportive. Be aware of the people, where they're seated and how they're positioned in terms of the leadership. Sometimes they're high up on a dais and sometimes they're not. Be articulate and faithful and confident in your space. We found when we were monitoring for general conference that people came to the monitors to ask them a host of questions that were not related to our work, but nonetheless you were there and you were able to respond when needed. So once we look at, we can go back one, I'm sorry. When we think about the implicit biases that we all carry, we want to be able to report in a way that brings integrity to this work. And it also calls us then to be self-aware, right? So before you go in, when you're speaking to the people who will actually do these observations, talk to them about their prejudices, their past experiences, so that they're not bringing all of that into the space, but they're sitting there as a neutral person, ready to observe all that is going to take place. Okay, let's go to the next slide. You may want to take a screenshot. I'll quote this piece clipped from GCOR, which says, in order to function at all, we need our implicit biases. This is especially important as it relates to the fight or flight mechanism. We would have a very difficult time surviving if we had to do a full analysis of every situation to determine whether we were in danger or not. And so I'm sure you're all aware of that fight or flight response that we have. That's natural. And the way to work through that is to begin to build relationships with people who are not like you. And then you begin to have a better understanding for the broadness of God's children. Let's go to the next slide. There's so many biases, right, for us to try to manage. And so we list them here so that in reviewing them with your team who are going to be doing the monitoring, they would be mindful of them, right? We just want to bring them to your attention. Linguistic biases. It's very, very easy to fall into this use of language that is not helpful when speaking to a culturally diverse group of people. Oftentimes, presiders may say, we'll call someone a layman of a particular area when it is indeed a lay person, because that person might not identify as a man. We also don't often share the same responsibilities for women as we do for men. So, for instance, there could be a time when you're in a plenary session and they're asking for nominations for a secretary. And often, they definitely get their vice chair, they get all those other pieces, but that secretary is often delegated to a woman. And we just want to be mindful of that. And you can't tell them, you can't speak out when you're monitoring, but you do want to be mindful of that fact, right? And pacing conversations so that everyone has the opportunity to process what is being shared. We are really good at using our acronyms in the United Methodist Church, but sometimes that's not helpful in settings where you could have first-time attendees. You could just have some people who are just not that well versed with all of the acronyms that we love to use as United Methodists. We are learning more and more about how people identify with disabilities. And we acknowledge that today I may not identify as one having a disability, but I may tomorrow or 2 days from now, we don't know. And so we understand that the language is evolving, and so are we. And so we don't want to use words like handicapped people can sit over here. We want to be more inclusive and broad when we are talking about persons who identify as having a disability. And one of our, it's not my favorite, I'll say something that you hear quite often in our setting is people referring to male bishops by their family name and people referring to women bishops by their first name. And so there's an example there, which is very common in different spaces throughout the church. So those are things that we would want to note. And there are more. So let's go to the next slide, please. When we are kind of running through the different areas of imbalance and selectivity, perceptions and expectations, think of all the different ways that people might be perceived or what the expectation is for that particular person's role. So say it's a Black person you're speaking of, and say, oh, well, they probably can sing. Ask them to lead the hymn in the devotion that we're about to do before we get to the plenary work. Those perceptions are the things that we're talking about, how we put people in boxes all of the time, and how that is unhelpful as we live to grow into a church that truly accepts all of God's children. This slide before us comes from the work of our sexual ethics where Becky Posey Williams leads this group. And it speaks to the guiding principles. These are not made up principles, right? These are the United Methodist Church's social principles. And so sometimes we need to bring people back to this. And I say this in the broadest sense because remember, as a monitor, that's not your role. But when you're training other monitors, this is something that you would want to expose them to. And maybe at your training session, you would go back to one of the devotions that was written for General Conference 2020-2024 and pick one of these devotions under justice or kindness or integrity, respect. Pick one and let that be the devotion that leads your time together once you've gathered your monitors. Let me pause and see if you have any questions thus far. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. Monitoring. This is the outline. What is it? Why we do it? How it's done? And then the important piece of reporting the findings. And so I'll say the last thing first. The data is what allows us to develop curriculum and conversations for the whole church. We use that data so we know what our next step needs to be. In your local conferences, it would be helpful if you did the same thing. So yes, we want to collect that, and we're going to create a portal where you'll be able to send it right back to GCSRW, but you should use that. How might that data be helpful to you in your conversations in your district, in your annual conference, in your COSROW work as you begin to chart your path in the fall and your calendar of how you're going to conduct yourselves in the upcoming months? What are the things that you need to address? What do you need to tackle? And where are the places you might need to push a little, right? So let's talk about monitoring. We can go to the next slide. Monitoring allows us to observe and check the progress of quality of something over time. So that's why we collect the data over and over again to see where the spaces of growth lie. And more importantly, is to ensure equity and fairness and process. We're trying to seek a balance. And so first people need to acknowledge and be aware that we are gravely imbalance, right? So that they can work toward being something better than we are. We can go to the next slide. And this is always fascinating to me. Who takes the opportunities to speak without being recognized? They just jump in, use their privilege and their voice to just assert themselves. And who is waiting to be recognized? Those are the type of comments that you would write on the back of your recording sheet. Because once again, you're not in the position to say, Mr. Presider, Ms. Presider, I'm noticing that this is going on. However, there are times when you might find that it's quite prudent to bring your concern to the presider. And the way you would do that is to go to your COSROW chairperson or your advocacy chairperson, whoever is over the work of COSROW in your annual conference. It could even be your director of connectional ministries, and say, especially when it's in the plenary session, we have observed that this type of behavior has been consistent, and we would like to see if you would change it so it could be more inclusive. That you have a right to do. And so you do that. I don't think I've ever heard anybody stand up on the floor and do it. That's where we're asking you to use those vehicles that you might get to your bishop to share whatever the concern is with them. The other piece is that prior to the day of annual conference, you have already worked through whether or not you are going to present daily to your annual conference, or if you're going to be able to put your written report in what your annual conference calls their daily reporting space. Or thirdly, if it's at the end, when you do a whole big summary at the end of the event. So you should be clear about the expectations of the body governing the annual conference and how you'll be able to work within those parameters. I see a question or concern from Julia. You can voice yourself if you like, Julia. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No.
It was just a question that occurred. In saying that when monitors are observing, they need to, take the information to their COSROW chairperson. I'm just wondering about then, well, what does the chairperson do? Because I believe we do have a couple of chairs here.
Yep.
So thinking through what our responsibility is in regards to how we present this information, is it something that's appropriate to just say from the podium, especially when it's something like, hey, Bishop, you've been referring to pastors, male pastors by their last name and female pastors by their first name.
So it's really a two-parter. I'm glad you asked that again. The first thing is whoever is doing the observation should bring it to the chairperson so that you can be the main spokesperson, right? And sometimes it's not an AC-COSROW chairperson. Sometimes it's the executive pastor over advocacy or whoever that is. You take it to that person. So as the chairperson, Julia, you would then go directly to your DCM, who would then tell the bishop. Another avenue, as a member and a voting member of your annual conference, you can speak from the floor. So that is also an opportunity for you. And another piece that comes up is, what if you bring that information to your DCM? The DCM gives it to the secretary and the bishop of your annual conference, and they may make an apology. People say, we're sorry that we have been using language that is limited, and we're trying to be more expansive in our language. And then they keep on doing the same thing. That becomes a bit of a quagmire. And I would suggest you bring it to their attention once more, right? We can't change behavior. We can bring awareness to where we have concerns and would hope that the church would want to move beyond where they are and present it back to them. And that's why it is helpful when annual conferences make space for the COSROW chair or some representative to stand up and give that report in real time, so that the hope is that we would make adjustments as the week progressed. Okay, and thank you for that question. So let us go to the next slide. I did want to note, in your recording, please note whether there are translators for different languages, or if there's an ASL translator. Where are the people who do have disabilities? Are they in a far off place, or are they within the bar of the annual conference? I experienced a time when people who had mobility concerns were placed in a balcony section where all the action is going way down on the main floor. And so how does that translate? Our space should also be open and welcoming. So in your observation, you're looking at who is getting overlooked because of where they're seated. In a corner, or their hand is up, but they're in the corner, and it seems as though the presider is only looking straight ahead or only directing their attention to the right side of the room or whatever. Sometimes you may see that happening. And then, of course, we talked about already people first when we are identifying people with disabilities, whether they are seen or unseen. And you know that identifying people with disabilities is very important in our learning. We keep on saying, yes, the language is evolving, but you know that paragraph 4, article 4, which will be ballot number 2, is coming before us. And so part of getting that message out, because of course we want a yes vote, is to be really clear about what that means, not just at annual conference gatherings, but in our day-to-day work as the church. So how we monitor. As annual conference monitors, you will observe the persons who are called upon to speak, the way the speakers address and show respect for one another, and report those findings to the legislative chair or the presiding bishop, members of the annual conference body, and then ultimately back to us as well, right? So in order to be prepared, we have to arrive early to the session. If you're a member, remember, if you're a member, you get to sit within the bar. Ensure that you have enough monitoring forms. Notate the time of your session, where it's located, just for future references, right? For your own future references. And write those narratives. I've found that the narrative is really helpful, especially when you've removed 5 days from the event and you're writing the report. And then you get the full understanding of what transpired and how they even got to that conversation. So write your narratives or type them up on your computers. And if you see something inappropriate, say something to your COSROW chair immediately. I saw a question pop up, and I want to honor that. Would someone unmute themselves?
I don't know if it was me or not, but in the previous slide, you said those called upon to speak. And I am assuming that includes people who are designated presenters for business and for worship.
It also means when they call people from the floor.
I knew the part from the floor, but I thought it might include everybody who was speaking.
It means everyone who's speaking.
Okay, thank you.
Whoever presenter or on the floor. And then remember, if your annual conference has legislative sections, then it means who's leading in those legislative sections and who are they acknowledging in their midst, who are they calling to speak, who's given the opportunity and who may not. And then and maybe you've been in spaces where one person does most of the talking in a group, and then when someone else gets up to speak, they put the timer on. You know, like, is everyone being treated fairly in those spaces? Let us go to the next slide. So last year, we had these cards that helped people know how to introduce themselves. And you likely will have to have a conversation with your annual conference because this is your request. What they do in some annual conferences, they'll print this out and post it on all the mics so people from the floor know this is how you should greet the body when you get up to speak. We've always stood up and said our annual conference, right? And whether we were clergy and lay. And so now we're asking for racial identity and the way in which you identify your gender. And the reason we're doing that is because we are keeping account. We are tallying that information. It's for no other reason than to see if the space is indeed balanced by the persons who have an opportunity to speak. And so the genders that we have on this form, I believe, is male, female, and non-binary. We'll see it in a few moments. And if we need to tweak that, we can also do that. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to show you the template that we have been using for writing our reports, and we will provide for you like a sample of a conference report so that you can use as a template if you get up and give your report and a written report. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I know that's tiny. That's why we're going to email you all of these documents. But this is the form that we have been using. And we'll also put put on the form the age, because the age changed. I don't know what year it changed, but it changed 2024. The age categories changed so that, let's see, it's the young adults. The young adults is 26 to 40 now. And so then everything else is 40 to 64. You know, we just get younger and younger. And then it's 40 to 64. And then older adults is 64 on. Okay. And that, of course, is important, right? If we're talking about being inclusive, are there any young adults? Are there any youth that are having voice on the floor or being lifted up to participate in the worship, a reporting time, anything? And unfortunately, in some spaces, you won't see a lot of that. So we want to encourage that. And by reporting back, you let the annual conference see, here are some areas that we really need to pay attention to.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Ellen.
Our annual conference, they put 36 plus. That was the age. There was a younger and then 36 plus.
30,
So
30
36
for-
plus.
yeah, so
No,
we,
it was, no, the thing that you said 40 to such and such and then 65 and older.
Mhm.
When was that? Who instituted that and when was it instituted?
So you should go back and look at general conferences.
It was a general
is 2024.
conference.
However they identify the ages, that's what we are to use.
Okay, so we can't do anything for this year, but I will let them know that they need to change that for next year
Mhm.
because the registration's already going on. But
Already in,
thank you,
okay.
thank you.
Yes. All right, let's go to our next slide. So this is what a slide might look like, a graph might look like in your reporting. This, of course, is from General Conference, but it's a little unbalanced, right? Just a little. And so we want to create some safe and brave space where people who are non-binary don't mind identifying, and that all the males don't have to do all the talking, all right? Like women can find more spaces to give voice to the work that's being shared on the floor. Let's go to the next slide. So when we put these links up, Roy was sharing with me, well, Denise, they won't be able to link them from the PowerPoint. So we will have to send all of this information to you in what we're calling a Dropbox folder and a portal where you'll also be able to report back to us GCSRW, after you've completed your reporting. And we really want to be clear. I think it's an important note. Monitoring is not policing or participating in the discussion or finger pointing and shaming. It is observing with intention. So if you are a voting member of your annual conference and you are monitoring, use your voice wisely. Do you have any questions about that? Let's go to the next slide. So this is a snapshot of what we pray this annual conference season will yield. And that is an amended version of paragraph 4, article 4. You should be able to access the QR code here, and that will give you the link to all of our resources on paragraph 4, article 4. I'm going to read it to you and see if it raises any questions, and hopefully it speaks to our whole purpose of monitoring and collecting the data. The United Methodist Church is a part of the Church Universal, which is one body in Christ. The United Methodist Church acknowledges that all persons are of sacred worth. All persons, without regard to race, gender, ability, color, national origin, status, or economic condition shall be eligible to attend its worship services, participate in its programs, receive the sacraments, upon baptism be admitted as baptized members, and upon taking vows declaring the Christian faith, become professing members in any local church in the connection. We have added the word, the General Conference voted to add the words gender and ability to this portion of the United Methodist Church's Constitution. And so at this annual conference, across our 130 annual conferences across the world, we will vote to ratify, to protect women and girls and people with disabilities, along with the other categories that are already protected by our Book of Discipline. And so the COSROW chairs have some resources and will be able to access other resources to share with the whole church about paragraph 4, article 4. So you have a big role and responsibility, and we really want you to be present during annual conference so you don't miss that vote, but also so that you are engaging as many people as you can to ensure that they know the importance of paragraph 4, article 4. So let us see one another, Roya. We can move from this slide and we can have some discussion. So friends, when you think about monitoring, you can probably raise your virtual hand, and if you'd like to speak, you can just unmute yourself right now, because I still can't see everyone. Have you already coalesced your teams that will do the reporting? I don't see any virtual hands. So is that something you'll be working on over the next 2 weeks? Julia has one. I see one hand.
Yeah. We're still working on gathering our monitors, but I actually had a question that I wanted to discuss with the group, if that's all right.
That's fine.
So in our Indiana annual conference, one of the concerns that has been brought to my attention has been a question about equality versus equity, where we see, because it was necessary at the time, and it still kind of is, we, in addition to everything that GCSRW encourages us to monitor, we also monitor how long people speak. And the question keeps coming up of, well, if 67% of this group speak for 67% of the time, isn't that a good thing? Doesn't that make sense? And how do you know, like, what are the demographics of the pool, of the body? Maybe 67% of something, but there's, 80% white people in the room. Just these questions that get deeper into digging the data and understanding what it means and trying to think through equality versus equity.
Equity. Yeah. And so for most of our work, we are seeking equity and not equality. So the longer scope would be to get to a place where there was some equality. And that's why we asked them to identify their race and ethnicity, because it speaks to, well, how many of that different ethnic group was actually present and had an opportunity to speak. So we would still say that just because the ethnic diversity was not evidence in those who had a place to speak or who chose to speak, that's still a problem, because there is no equity. Why is it that you only have such a small group of ethnic diverse people in the annual conference? So that's an ongoing conversation, right? We unfortunately can't solve that, but we can report on it. Yes, Stephanie.
To kind of add onto that, we realized last year that we needed to break out the data a little bit differently. I'm in CalPAC because we have intentional diverse voices from the stage when it's a planned event, a worship service or a presentation, but not in a plenary when people are speaking from the floor. We have decent gender diversity. We have over 50% of our conference is women, and over 50% of our delegates are usually women. But it's mostly white people speaking from the floor. And so that was one of the things we observed last year. So we actually break out the data in that way too. We take the worship services and like the planned events and put them on one spreadsheet, and then we take the plenaries and people who were speaking from the floor and put that in a separate category to break those two things out. Because I think that shows a little bit more of the equity as opposed to the equality, right? We can have some intentional diversity, but how is it actually playing out in real life? And we also have a benefit that our data manager for the conference is on COSROW. And so she also was able to give us the data on who was registered, broken down by race and gender. So we could see we have a significant amount of diversity in our conference, but the majority of delegates are white. So how is that? We could report on that to the conference.
And if I'm not mistaken, you have a large Tongan community in your annual conference. So so then the question becomes, why aren't they coming to the floor? Where are the barriers there?
Right.
Especially if they're mostly women. So, that means some deeper conversations. That's why I said the data will inform you as the AC-COSROW. What is the work that we need to do in this space? But I like that idea of separating the plenary things, because the things that are planned are nice, right? You use the word nice. But in reality, everybody's just the same people speaking again and again on the floor.
And I do have a logistical question in terms of counting. I just want to double check this, that we are counting the number of times somebody speaks, not the number of people who are speaking, right? So like if the bishop talks every single session, she gets counted every single time.
It depends on it. You have to kind of play that by ear. I usually count it twice, just keep on talking. But when you're doing your tally, you have to say these are presiders. So their role was to govern the whole conversation, right? And I think it also becomes it raises up for you if you can see that the presider always has to speak. Whenever there's a silent moment, that person always has to give so you might put that in your narrative.
Okay. Yeah, because it can kind of skew our data, right? Because again, a lot of our representation is women of color, but the actual people who are doing the most participation are not. So yeah, we'll talk through that with our group.
That's
Thank
a good question.
We do at our conference of the Upper New York. It depends if they're speaking on a topic and they speak more than once. We only count them one time. If it's a new topic, then you count them again. So like if they come up and present and answer a question and all that, this just counts as one.
Thanks for that, Ellen.
Hi.
So we're going to do Crystal, and then we're going to go to Gabrielle.
Well, we're from the same conference.
We're from the same conference, so I'm gonna let her go first.
We
and
probably
then
have the same general questions. So G&J is going to be monitoring for the first time this year, like in most people's recollection.
Right.
Definitely the first time in 12 years. So I'd love to hear things, from other folks who have been doing this for a long time. What are the kinds of things that we should be paying attention to? But I'd also love to hear some support on, so our COSROW, our boards and agencies are not very strong in G&J for a lot of reasons. And so even getting us to the point where COSROW is monitoring with GCOR is pretty impressive for us. And we're very proud of that. But I'm going to nicely say, we don't necessarily have the strongest leadership in those two places. And so I am concerned about if there is a problem, if there's something that we want to raise, who should we circumvent if the chairs are not, who should we circumvent to if the chairs are not being as responsive or helpful as we need them to be?
I would go to your Director of Connectional Ministries.
Okay, cool. Perfect.
Great question. That was not my question, but it is a good question because we do have challenges. So my question is, so this is the first time that we'll be monitoring. I can say I put a request in to our annual conference bishop the past 6 years in a row. We were told no every single time. We got a new bishop and she said yes. So we're really excited. And so one of my questions is, you talked a little bit earlier about like when you report back, like I was wondering if anyone could talk a little bit about like how often you report, what does that reporting look like at an annual conference? Because I know the examples you gave, Denise, were at general conference, but general conference is also a lot bigger and a lot longer than an annual conference. So is it every day? Is it once at the end? Do you do it in the journal? Sort of like, what is that structure? Because I think we're about to figure out what our structure is. And I'd like to be able to have, I guess, just some best practices to take into our meeting about it.
Thank you, Crystal. Would some of you who have more experience like to share? Then I'll offer. I don't hear any voices. Maybe they'll speak up in a few minutes. So my first advice would be, it's so much easier when you can do it at the beginning of the day as opposed to the end of the day. Because the end of the day, people are packing up their belongings and going back to their rooms, and they could kind of tune things out at that hour. If it is going to be published every day, and I know publishing now is using an email, that's a good way to get it to them at night, so or early in the morning before they reconvene, so it's fresh. I'm trying to think if my own annual conference does it every day. I also think that the Director of Connectional Ministry continues to bring awareness and reminding the people to please identify yourselves this way, and refer them to the categories that we use. And so that constant reminder that you may see some AC-COSROW folks monitoring or in your plenary, so they are aware. It's like constantly bringing awareness to the work that we are engaged in. So to talk to whoever, your DCM, your bishop, however you need to communicate that, because also time is short, right? Most of us have cut the days we're actually in session down. So talk to them about what is the most effective way and why you think and believe it's useful that they hear this every day.
Got it. Thank you so much. And our DCM is great, and she's been very helpful in helping us to sort of think through and talk through how we're going to do this. So she's the person I'm going to go back to.
I'm glad, Crystal, excuse me.
No.
It's not like a 10-minute report. You need to be short and concise.
Short. Okay, thank you so much.
I can share a little bit about what we do.
Thank you.
And again, last year was the first year that we did this. So this year is the year where we're really like know what we're doing. So we requested time at the opening plenary and then at the closing plenary. Because logistically speaking, like I'm going to be there as a clergy person with my 5-year-old. So I'm not going to have time to collect all the data every single day to be able to know for sure that I'm going to be able to report it. Like I can't commit myself to that. But I do want to make sure that we have something at the end. And then what we did was we wrote we used the template that GCSRW has, and we wrote, and I just realized I never actually sent this to you guys, so I will send it to you. But we wrote a full report and then sent it to the bishop, our EDCM, our cabinet, the assistant to the bishop, like everybody on that list. And then we're working on getting our own webpage on our conference website, and we'll post it all there along with all the other COSROW resources, so that it, and then we'll have it sent out in a regular like conference monthly newsletter, so that everybody in the annual conference who signed up for that has access to it. And we also included a decent amount of it in our COSROW report that's going in our conference preliminary report for this year's annual conference.
That's good. Remember last week when many of us had gathered for the training event, talked a lot about next steps. And so Stephanie, is listening to you, it made me think that, so your next step is to then, when the fall comes, to go back to either I was getting ready to use some acronyms, the Director of Connectional Ministries or the Assistant to the Bishop, and say, here are some of our findings that we reported on during annual conference. How might the cabinet embody these and live into them? And do we need to be helpful? Do we need to call Becky in? Like, what do we need for next steps? And get yourself inserted into their agenda moving forward into the new year, if you will. Any other questions or concerns? Does everyone know how to get a team and why it's important not to try to tackle this with just 2 people? Okay. So within the next probably 7 days, you will receive an email from GCSRW with this information embedded in it, and also a vehicle or Dropbox for you to report back to us. But the most important thing I think you should take away is we are all here for each other, and there are many nuances that arise as we engage this process. So we want you to, be kind to yourself, and know that you always have a resource in us and in one another as we expand our network of AC-COSROWs. Okay? I don't hear any other questions or concerns. Stephanie, did you want to say? Stephanie York, Arnold, did you want to say? Would you like to add something?
Great to see everybody. And I really look forward to hearing how your experience is in your annual conference, for those of y'all who are just beginning this journey, and for those of y'all who are tweaking it and learning things that you can bring back to us. We are all ears for how to make it better. Thank you, Denise.
Well, siblings, as we go forth, may we be mindful that we are not on this journey alone. May you be emboldened to hold up the love and grace that God has for each one of us, and hold it for other people, that we might create space for people to fully connect and fully be who God has called them to be. Thanks be to God for each one of you. Have a blessed Holy Week and Palm and Passion Sunday.